The castle stood against the dying light like a broken tooth, its spires clawing at clouds that had forgotten how to rain. For 3 centuries, it had watched over the valley below, silent and patient as the villages beneath it grew and withered and grew again. The locals called it Castellul and Tuneric, the Dark Castle, and they whispered its name only when necessary, only when the children asked why they must never venture up the mountain path after sunset. Isabella had heard these whispers all her life. She had grown up in the shadow of that mountain, in a house where garlic hung from every doorway and mirrors were positioned to face the windows. Her grandmother had taught her the old prayers, the ones spoken in a language that predated the church, words that tasted of iron and earth. But Isabella was 23 now, educated at the university in Bucharest, and she had learned to laugh at superstition, the way young people do when they believe the world has revealed all its secrets to them. The letter had arrived on a Tuesday, delivered by a courier who would not meet her eyes. The envelope was thick, cream-colored, sealed with black wax that bore no discernible mark. Inside, written in an elegant hand that seemed to flow across the paper like water, was an invitation. The castle in Tuneric sought a librarian. The position offered housing, a generous salary, and access to one of the most complete private collections in Eastern Europe. For someone who had spent her childhood dreaming of dusty volumes and forgotten knowledge, it was everything she had ever wanted. Her mother had wept when Isabella announced she would accept. Her grandmother had said nothing at all, only pressed a small silver pendant into her palm, an intricate knot of symbols that hurt to look at too directly. Isabella had thanked her, placed it in her suitcase, and tried not to think about the expression on the old woman's face, like someone watching a beloved bird fly directly into a storm. The journey to the castle took most of a day. The hired car could only go so far up the mountain before the road became impassable, and Isabella completed the final miles on foot, her suitcase growing heavier with each step. The forest pressed close on either side of the path, thick with pine and shadow. No birds sang. Even the insects seemed to have abandoned this place, leaving only silence and the crunch of her footsteps on stones that might have been placed there centuries ago, or might have been there since the world was born. She reached the castle gates as the sun touched the horizon. They stood open, as if they had been waiting specifically for her arrival at this precise moment. The courtyard beyond was larger than she had expected, paved with stones worn smooth by countless feet. A fountain stood at its center, dry and cracked, its statue too weathered to identify. The castle itself loomed above, its windows dark save for a single light burning in what must have been the highest tower. The front door opened before she could knock. The woman who stood there was perhaps 40, or perhaps ageless. Her face was pale and perfect as porcelain, her hair pulled back so tightly it seemed to stretch her features. She wore a black dress that belonged to no particular era, or perhaps to all of them simultaneously. When she smiled, it did not reach her eyes. "Miss Isabella Rădescu, we have been expecting you. I am Madame Vazaille, the steward of this household. Please, come inside. The master will receive you after you have rested from your journey." The interior of the castle was a museum of shadows. Tapestries depicting battles and hunts hung from walls of stone so thick that Isabella imagined they could swallow sound itself. Candles burned in sconces, real candles, not electric lights, their flames steady and unflickering despite the drafts that Isabella could feel moving through the corridors like invisible currents. The floors were covered in carpets so old that their colors had faded to a uniform gray, and the furniture that occasionally appeared in alcoves and doorways seemed to belong to a dozen different centuries, as if the castle had simply accumulated things over time and never bothered to remove anything. Her room was in the east wing, up a spiral staircase that seemed to wind endlessly upward. It was larger than her entire apartment in Bucharest had been, dominated by a 4-poster bed draped in velvet curtains the color of dried blood. A fire burned in the fireplace, though Isabella had seen no one who might have lit it. French doors opened onto a small balcony that overlooked the valley, where the villages below were beginning to light their evening lamps, tiny points of warmth in the gathering dark. "The master dines at midnight," Madame Vasile said from the doorway. "Someone will come for you. Please make yourself comfortable. The washroom is through there. Fresh clothes have been provided in the wardrobe. We assumed your own might not be suitable for dinner." Before Isabella could ask what was wrong with her clothes, the steward had vanished, the door clicking shut with a finality that suggested locks, though Isabella could see no bolt or key. She explored the room slowly, her heart beating faster than she cared to admit. The wardrobe did indeed contain clothes, all in her size exactly, all in shades of deep blue and black and burgundy. The washroom featured a claw-footed tub large enough to drown in, and a mirror that showed her reflection slightly wrong, as if she were looking at herself through water. The books on the shelves beside the bed were all first editions, some so rare that Isabella recognized them from her studies volumes that should have been in museums or private collections, not sitting casually beside a stranger's bed. She bathed and changed, choosing a dress of midnight blue that fit her perfectly, unsettlingly so. When she looked at herself in the mirror, she barely recognized the woman staring back. The dress transformed her from a librarian into something else, something that belonged in this castle of whispers and shadows. She touched her grandmother's pendant, still around her neck, and felt slightly steadier. The knock came precisely at midnight. Not a minute before, not a second after. Isabella opened the door to find not Madame Vasile, but a young man, no more than 20, with eyes that seemed too old for his face. He bowed slightly and gestured for her to follow. The dining room was on the ground floor, in the castle's heart. It was smaller than Isabella had expected, intimate rather than grand. A single table dominated the space, set for two with silver that gleamed in the candlelight. Paintings covered the walls, portraits, mostly of stern-faced men and women in the clothing of various eras. All of them shared a certain quality around the eyes, a particular intensity of gaze that made Isabella feel as though they were watching her rather than the other way around. At the head of the table sat the master of the castle. He was beautiful. That was Isabella's first thought, and she hated herself for it, for the way her breath caught slightly when he rose to greet her. He was tall, with features that seemed carved from marble-sharp cheekbones, a straight nose, a mouth that suggested both cruelty and poetry. His hair was dark and long enough to brush his shoulders, and his eyes were a gray so pale they were almost silver. He wore black, as she had somehow known he would, but the cut and style of his clothing was modern, incongruous in this place of ancient stones. "Miss Rădescu, welcome to my home. I am Victor Drăculești." His voice was deep and soft, the kind of voice that made you lean forward to hear it better. "Please, sit. You must be hungry after your journey." Isabella sat. She was not hungry, her stomach was too tight with nervousness, but she did not say so. Victor sat across from her, and almost immediately, servants appeared from doorways Isabella had not noticed, bearing silver platters. The food was elaborate, multiple courses of dishes Isabella could not identify, all presented beautifully and all tasting of nothing. She pushed things around her plate and tried to make conversation. "Your collection, Madame Vasile mentioned it is extensive. One of the most complete in Europe, perhaps in the world. I have been gathering books for a very long time, Miss Rădescu. Knowledge has always been my passion. Knowledge and preservation. How long have you been collecting?" A smile touched his lips. "Longer than you might imagine. My family has occupied this castle for many generations. Each of us has added to the library. You will find volumes here that exist nowhere else, manuscripts that the world believes lost. That is why I needed someone with your particular qualifications, someone who understands not just books, but their importance, their fragility, someone who can help me preserve what should not be forgotten. I'm honored that you considered me for the position. You were the only one I considered. Your thesis on medieval manuscripts was exceptional. Your understanding of preservation techniques, your language skills, Romanian, Latin, Greek, and German, I believe, all precisely what I require. And beyond that," he paused, those silver eyes fixed on her with an intensity that made her feel transparent. Beyond that, you have something else. A quality I cannot quite name. A connection to the old ways, perhaps. Your grandmother taught you things, did she not? Things not found in university textbooks. Isabella's hand went unconsciously to the pendant beneath her dress. How could you know that? I make it my business to know things, Miss Rădescu. It is how one survives for, he stopped, corrected himself. It is how one succeeds in preserving history, by understanding context, by understanding people. The meal continued in a strange dance of conversation that revealed nothing and implied everything. Victor asked about her education, her family, her dreams. Isabella answered carefully, increasingly aware that she was being evaluated for something beyond her ability to catalog books. And throughout it all, she noticed that Victor's plate remained untouched, that his wine glass, though filled, never seemed to empty because he never seemed to drink. When the meal ended, he stood and offered his hand. Come, let me show you why you are truly here. The library occupied the entire west wing of the castle. It was a cathedral of knowledge, 3 stories high, with spiral staircases connecting the levels and walkways that crossed the open space like delicate bridges. Thousands upon thousands of books lined the walls, their spines a tapestry of languages and ages. The air smelled of leather and paper and time itself, that particular scent of old knowledge carefully preserved. Isabella felt tears prick her eyes. It was everything she had ever wanted. I have spent lifetimes gathering these, Victor said, and this time he did not correct himself. Some I acquired legally, some less so. Some I copied before the originals were destroyed, preserving knowledge that would otherwise have vanished. Wars, fires, floods, I have saved what I could. But I am running out of time. Running out of time? But surely, nothing lasts forever, Miss Rădescu, not even me. And when I am gone, this collection needs someone who will protect it. Someone who will understand its value. Someone who will ensure it survives. Isabella turned to look at him. In the dim light of the library, his face seemed different, older somehow, as if the weight of years was pressing down on features usually held perfect by some tremendous effort of will. How old are you? The question escaped before she could stop it. Old enough to have met Gutenberg. Old enough to have walked in ancient Rome when it was still a republic. Old enough to be tired, Miss Rădescu, though I suspect you will not believe me. That's impossible. Is it? You wear your grandmother's protection around your neck. You were raised on stories of things that walk in the dark. Your education may have taught you to dismiss such things. But here, in this place, surely you can feel that something is different. That the rules are not quite what you were taught to believe. Isabella wanted to laugh, to accuse him of madness, but the words died in her throat. Because she could feel it, had been feeling it since she entered the castle. A thickness to the air, a weight to the shadows, as if the world here operated under slightly different laws than the one she had left at the mountain's base. What are you? She whispered. I think you know. Your grandmother knew. That is why she wept when you accepted my invitation. That is why she gave you that pendant old magic, real magic, the kind that can still hold back things like me if the wearer believes strongly enough. Things like you. Vampires, Miss Rădescu, Strigoi, Nosferatu, the undead, call us what you will. The name matters less than the reality. Isabella stumbled backward, her hand clutching the pendant. Victor made no move to follow her. He simply stood there, ancient and impossibly patient. I will not harm you, he said. That is not why you are here. I do not need a victim, Miss Rădescu. I need a successor. Someone to take over the responsibility of this collection when I am finally gone. Gone? You said you've lived for centuries, and I am weary of it. There are ways to end an immortal existence, but they require certain preparations, certain assurances that the work will continue. I have perhaps 5 years left, perhaps 10. And in that time, I need you to learn everything about this library, about its contents, about the methods I have developed for preservation. And then, when I am gone, you will take over. You will protect these books, continue to add to the collection, ensure that knowledge is not lost. Why would I stay? Why wouldn't I run from here right now? Because of what you see around you. Because you understand, perhaps better than anyone alive, the value of what is here. Because you know that if you leave, if I cannot find someone suitable, I will have to destroy it all rather than let it fall into hands that would not cherish it. And because I think a part of you has always been waiting for something like this. Something that matters. Something that gives your life meaning beyond the ordinary. He was right, and Isabella hated that he was right. Even terrified, even wanting to flee, she was looking at the books around them. Her mind cataloging titles, recognizing treasures, understanding the magnitude of what Victor had assembled. This was not just a collection. It was a monument to human knowledge, a fortress against forgetting. I need time to think, she managed. Take the night. Explore the library if you wish. The doors to the outside are locked until dawn, not to keep you prisoner, but because there are things in these mountains that are dangerous even to me, and they are more active in the dark. In the morning, you can leave if you choose, but I hope you will stay. He left her there, alone among the books. Isabella sank into a chair, her hands shaking. Everything she had believed about the world had just shattered like dropped glass, and she was standing in the wreckage trying to decide if she should rebuild or simply walk away. She did not sleep that night. Instead, she wandered through the library, pulling volumes from shelves at random, reading passages by candlelight. Here was a medieval bestiary with illustrations of creatures that should not exist. Here was a journal written by an alchemist who claimed to have found the secret of immortality. Here was a collection of folk tales from before Christianity, still preserving the older, darker stories. And here, filed carefully in a section devoted to first-hand accounts, were journals written in Victor's own hand, stretching back centuries. She opened one dated 1789 and began to read. The account it contained was meticulous and horrifying. Victor described the French Revolution not as a historian, but as someone who had been there, who had watched the tumult and the terror and understood it as a pattern he had seen before in other cities, other centuries. He wrote about immortality not as a gift but as a burden, about watching everyone he had ever cared for grow old and die while he remained unchanged. He wrote about the struggle to retain his humanity, to not become the monster that his nature constantly urged him to be. I have not killed for food in 200 years, one entry read. I survive on animal blood and the blood of volunteers, those who come to me seeking the gift of immortality and are willing to pay the price of a little pain for the promise of eternal life. I do not tell them that immortality is its own punishment. They discover that soon enough. I have created 3 others like myself over the centuries. All 3 eventually chose to end their existence. I do not blame them. Isabella read until the candles burned low, until the sky outside began to lighten with the approach of dawn. She read Victor's grief and loneliness, his determination to preserve knowledge because it was the only thing that gave his endless life meaning. She read about his search for someone who could take over the library, someone who would understand its importance and have the dedication to protect it. She read, essentially, about a being that was both monster and man, struggling to remain more of the latter than the former. When Madame Vasile found her in the morning, Isabella was asleep in the chair, a journal still open in her lap. The steward said nothing, only draped a blanket over her shoulders and left food on a nearby table. Isabella woke several hours later, stiff and disoriented. The events of the previous night seemed like a dream, except that the library was still around her, still real, still magnificent and terrible in its scope. She ate the food mechanically, not tasting it, her mind churning. She should leave, she knew that. Every rational part of her brain was screaming at her to gather her things and flee down the mountain and never look back. But another part, a part that perhaps her grandmother had nurtured with all those old stories, was whispering something different. This was real magic, real history, real importance. This was a chance to preserve something that mattered, to be part of something larger than herself. And more than that, more than she wanted to admit, she was curious. terribly, dangerously curious. She found Victor in the courtyard, sitting beside the dry fountain as the sun set. She had half expected him to burst into flames in the daylight, but he merely looked uncomfortable. His pale skin reddened slightly, like someone with a severe sunburn. He stood when he saw her. "You did not leave." "I'm still deciding," Isabella said. "But I have questions." "Many questions. Ask them. If I stay, will you turn me into what you are?" "Not unless you request it, and even then, I would strongly discourage it. Immortality is not the blessing it appears to be. It is a prison with no bars, and no escape except the final one. The blood you drink, where does it come from? Animals mostly. And there are those who come to me willingly, seeking the experience. I take only what I need, never enough to harm. I have not killed a human being for sustenance in over 2 centuries, but you have killed. Yes, I will not lie to you, Miss Rădescu. I have been a monster. In my youth, though youth hardly seems the right word for someone already a century dead, I did monstrous things. I fed on whom I pleased and cared nothing for the consequences. But time teaches even creatures like me. Pain teaches us. Loss teaches us. I learned to value human life because I have seen so much of it extinguished. I learned to value knowledge because I have watched entire cultures disappear. I am trying in my way to make amends for what I was by preserving what can be preserved. Isabella sat down on the fountain's edge, and after a moment, Victor joined her, keeping a careful distance between them. "Why me?" she asked. "There must be scholars more qualified, people with more experience. Knowledge can be learned, Miss Rădescu. Dedication can be taught. But the quality you possess, the ability to see beyond the surface of things, to understand that the world is stranger and more complex than most people allow themselves to believe, that is rare. Your grandmother saw it in you. That is why she taught you the old ways alongside the new. She knew you would need both. She knew about you. She suspected. Her family has lived in these mountains for generations. They remember the stories, keep the old traditions. She knew that if you came here, you would be walking into something dangerous. But she also knew that you would not be content with an ordinary life, with ordinary work. The pendant she gave you is powerful protection. As long as you wear it and believe in its power, I cannot compel you, cannot harm you, cannot turn you against your will. She gave you a choice, Miss Rădescu. Stay or go, but stay with your eyes open and your will your own." Isabella touched the pendant again, feeling its weight, its reassurance. "If I stay, I want your word that you will not feed on me. You have it, and I want access to everything. All of the library, all of your journals, all of the truth. No more secrets, no more carefully worded half-truths. Agreed. And when your time comes, when you choose to end your existence, I want you to teach me how. I want to understand the process, the ritual, whatever it requires. If I'm to be the guardian of this place, I need to know everything." Victor's expression was complex, shifting between surprise and something that might have been respect. "You are more courageous than I anticipated, or perhaps more foolish. I have not yet decided which." "Neither have I," Isabella said. "But I'm staying. At least for now." The months that followed were the strangest of Isabella's life. By day, she worked in the library, cataloging the vast collection, learning the intricate system Victor had developed over centuries. By night, she dined with her employer, though he never ate, only watched her with those unsettling silver eyes and listened to stories that spanned millennia. Victor was a teacher unlike any she had encountered. He did not simply recite facts but provided context, connection, the living history that textbooks could never capture. He had met Mozart, had discussed philosophy with Voltaire, had watched the invention of the printing press and understood immediately how it would transform the world. He described historical events with the clarity of someone who had been there, because he had been. But he also spoke of the cost. The endless parade of deaths, friends and lovers and children, growing old while he remained frozen at the age he had been when turned 35. Forever 35, forever watching the world change while he stayed the same. He described the slow erosion of humanity that came with immortality, the way empathy and connection became harder to maintain when you had outlived everyone you had ever cared for a dozen times over. "I have been in love 4 times, he told her one night, his voice distant. Truly in love, the kind that makes you believe that perhaps immortality is not a curse after all, because you will have forever with this person. All 4 times, I watched them age and die. The last was in 1823. I swore after her death that I would never allow myself to feel that way again. It is easier to be alone, Miss Rădescu. Loneliness is painful, but it is a steady pain, manageable. Grief is a blade that cuts fresh every time." Isabella found herself drawn to him despite herself, despite the danger, despite everything she knew about what he was. There was a gentleness to him, a careful courtesy that spoke of someone trying very hard to remain civilized in the face of monstrous nature. He never approached her too closely, never touched her without permission. When he fed, and she knew when he fed, could see it in the slight flush to his pale skin, the way he moved with more fluidity. He left the castle entirely, returning hours later with that look of controlled disgust on his face, as if the act of sustaining himself repulsed him. She asked him about it once, and he answered with brutal honesty, "I hate what I am, Miss Rădescu. I hate the hunger that never entirely goes away, the way blood tastes like life itself, the momentary rush of vitality that comes from feeding. I hate that I need it, that without it I would desiccate and eventually fall into a torpor from which I might never wake. If I could exist without feeding, I would. But that is not an option available to me." As the months turned into a year, Isabella fell into a rhythm. She worked in the library, losing herself in the beauty of ancient texts. She continued to add to the collection, acquiring new volumes through the network of contacts Victor had established. She learned to read languages she had never encountered, guided by Victor's patient instruction. And slowly, carefully, she began to piece together the truth of what he was planning. The journals were explicit when she knew where to look. Victor was preparing for a ritual that would end his existence permanently. Not the half-death of a staked vampire, but true and final destruction. It required specific conditions, a certain alignment of celestial bodies, a series of preparations both physical and metaphysical. And it required a witness, someone to perform the final steps when Victor himself could no longer continue. "You want me to kill you," Isabella said when she finally confronted him with the knowledge. "I want you to free me," Victor corrected. "There is a difference. I have lived long enough, Miss Rădescu. I am tired. The world has become strange to me, moving at speeds I can no longer follow. The technology, the rapid change, I am a creature of older, slower times. I no longer fit. And more than that, I no longer wish to fit. I am ready to rest." "When?" 3 years from now. The alignment will be perfect. I will have taught you everything you need to know about the library, about its preservation, about the responsibilities that come with guarding it. And then, if you are willing, you will help me pass into whatever comes after this." Isabella should have been horrified. Perhaps she was. In some part of herself she had stopped listening to. But mostly, she felt a deep sadness. "You've been alone for so long." "Yes, but these last months, with you here, it has been less lonely. I thank you for that, Miss Rădescu. You have given me a gift more precious than you know. You have reminded me what it is to have a companion, someone to share the burden of knowledge with. It makes the ending easier, knowing that what I leave behind will be cherished." The second year was harder than the first. Isabella had grown accustomed to Victor's presence, to their nightly conversations, to the way he would smile when she discovered something particularly fascinating in the collection. She had grown accustomed, she realized with the start, to caring for him. Not as one might care for a monster or an employer, but as one might care for a friend. Perhaps more than a friend, though she tried not to examine that thought too closely. Victor, for his part, seemed to be changing as well. Or perhaps not changing so much as relaxing, letting down guards that had been in place for centuries. He laughed more easily, spoke more freely. Once, when Isabella cut her hand on a broken binding, he had fled the room entirely, returning only hours later with an expression of such controlled anguish that she understood how much effort it took for him to remain civilized in the face of his nature. "I'm sorry," he had said. "The scent of your blood, it is difficult. Not because I wish to feed on you, but because the hunger itself is so demanding. It has been a very long time since I felt tempted. Your grandmother's protection is powerful, but instinct is powerful too." Isabella had bandaged the cut carefully and wore gloves when working with fragile books after that. But the incident had made something clear to both of them. The situation was becoming complicated in ways neither had anticipated. It was in the middle of the second year that Isabella made her first critical discovery. She had been cataloging a section of the library devoted to occult manuscripts when she found a series of texts on vampirism, including several that Victor himself had annotated. The notes were scholarly, detached, analyzing the condition from a scientific perspective. But buried within them was a passage that made Isabella's breath catch. The cure, if it can be called such, requires the complete absence of the hunger. One must achieve a state of perfect satiation combined with perfect will. The vampire must feed upon one who offers their blood freely, with love and without fear. In that moment, if the vampire can resist the urge to drain completely, if they can take only what is needed and stop, the curse begins to unravel. It is not instantaneous, but over years, perhaps decades, the immortality fades. The vampire becomes human once more, mortal once more. They age, they die, but they die as a human dies, passing into whatever afterlife awaits, rather than into the void that claims the undead. Isabella read the passage 3 times, her heart pounding. She found Victor in his study, staring out at the mountains. "Why didn't you tell me?" she demanded, holding up the manuscript. He did not turn around. "Because it is not a cure, Miss Rădescu. It is a fairy tale. A hope that has led to disappointment countless times. You've tried it?" "Once, with the woman I loved in 1823. She offered herself freely, with all the conditions met. I fed carefully, took only what the ritual required. And nothing happened. She grew old and died, and I remained exactly as I am. The cure is a myth. But what if it's not? What if you simply didn't wait long enough, or the conditions weren't quite right? Miss Rădescu." He finally turned to face her, and his expression was tired, ancient. "I have existed for over 2,000 years. I have tried every cure, every ritual, every supposed remedy. Nothing works. The only escape is the one I have planned: complete destruction. I appreciate your hope, but please do not torture me with it." Isabella wanted to argue, but the look in his eyes stopped her. Instead, she filed the information away and continued her work, though her mind kept circling back to that passage, to the possibility it represented. The third year arrived too quickly. Victor began teaching her the ritual he had planned, the specific steps that would need to be followed. It was complex and brutal, requiring Isabella to drive a stake through his heart, while speaking words in a language so old that even Victor was not entirely certain of its origins. Then she would need to burn his body completely, scattering the ashes in running water before sunrise. Only then would he be truly gone. "I will not fight you," he promised. "I will use what will remains to me to stay still, to make it as quick as possible. But I will not lie and say it will be easy, Miss Rădescu. For either of us. Don't call me that anymore," Isabella said quietly. "You've known me for 3 years. Call me Isabella." Something shifted in his expression, a crack in the careful control. "Isabella, thank you for everything." They were sitting in the library, as they had countless times before, but the air felt different now, charged with all the things they had not said. Isabella found herself thinking about the cure passage again, about the possibility neither of them wanted to acknowledge. "Victor," she said carefully, "what if there was another way? There isn't, but what if there was? What if the cure could work, if the conditions were perfect? They cannot be perfect. The variables are too complex. one who offers their blood freely, with love and without fear. Isabella stood, her heart hammering. I offer mine. The silence that followed was absolute. Victor stared at her as if she had struck him. You cannot possibly, you don't understand what you're suggesting. I understand perfectly. I'm offering you the chance to become human again. To age and die naturally. To have however many years remain as immortal, rather than choosing destruction now. I'm offering this freely, Victor. With love. She said the word deliberately, watching his face. And without fear. Isabella, no. The risk if I cannot stop, if the hunger overwhelms me. You've been controlling the hunger for 2 centuries. You've never harmed me, never even come close. Your grandmother's pendant will protect me if your will falters. But I don't believe it will need to. I trust you. You should not trust me. I am a monster. You're a man who has spent 2,000 years trying not to be a monster. You're a scholar, a preserver of knowledge, someone who has chosen isolation and pain rather than harm others. You're many things, Victor, but you stopped being just a monster a long time ago. He closed his eyes, and when he opened them again, they were gleaming with something that might have been tears, if vampires could cry. Why would you do this for me? Because in 3 years, you've become the most important person in my life. Because the thought of destroying you, of watching you burn to ash and scatter to nothing, is unbearable. Because if there's even a chance that you could live, truly live, I have to try. And because, she took a breath, because I love you. Not the idea of you, not the immortal vampire or the tragic figure. You, the person who gets excited about medieval manuscripts and makes terrible puns in Latin and sits in the courtyard at sunset, even though it hurts because you missed natural light. That person. I love that person. The distance between them closed. Isabella was not sure who moved first. Victor's hands came up to cup her face, gentle despite their strength, and his forehead rested against hers. I do not deserve this, he whispered. I do not deserve you. Maybe not, but you have me anyway. So what do you say? Will you try? Will you give yourself the chance to be human again? The struggle played out across his features, hope warring with fear, desire battling against the ingrained instinct to protect her from himself. Finally he nodded. I will try. God help me, Isabella, I will try. The ritual they performed that night was nothing like the violent destruction Victor had planned. Instead, Isabella sat with him in his private chambers, her wrist bared. Victor knelt before her like a supplicant, his hands shaking slightly as he took her hand in his. If at any point you feel fear, if the hunger becomes too much, stop, Isabella said firmly. Promise me. I promise. He lowered his mouth to her wrist, and Isabella felt the sharp pain of his fangs breaking skin. But the pain faded almost instantly, replaced by something warm, almost pleasant. She could feel him drinking, feel the pull of blood leaving her body, but it was gentle, controlled. His eyes never left hers, and in them she saw such concentration, such fierce determination not to harm her. When he finally pulled away, his lips stained red, Isabella felt lightheaded but not weak. He had taken enough to satisfy the ritual's requirements, but not so much that she was in danger. She pressed a bandage to her wrist and smiled. See, you did it. Victor sat back and his expression was one of wonder. I can feel it. Something changing. It's subtle, but it's there. Like a wall that has stood for centuries beginning to crack. Over the following weeks, the changes became more noticeable. Victor could tolerate sunlight for longer periods. His reflection, which had always been faint and distorted in mirrors, began to solidify. He started eating human food again, tentatively at first, and found that he could actually taste it. The hunger that had defined his existence for 2 millennia began to quiet, becoming an echo rather than a roar. And he aged. Slowly, almost imperceptibly at first, but Isabella could see it. Lines appeared at the corners of his eyes. His hair, which had been uniformly dark for centuries, began to show threads of silver at the temples. He was becoming human again, mortal again, transforming from a creature frozen in time into a man who would one day die. Far from being frightened by the change, Victor seemed liberated. He laughed more, smiled more. He began venturing down to the village, interacting with people without the careful distance he had always maintained. He taught Isabella everything he knew with renewed urgency, not because he was planning to die, but because he wanted to share the knowledge while he had the chance. "I estimate I have perhaps 30 years left," he said one evening, watching the sunset from the courtyard. "Maybe 40 if I am fortunate. It seems so short after 2,000 years, but it is enough, more than enough. Because I will spend them truly living, not simply existing." Isabella leaned against him, his arm around her shoulders. "We'll spend them together. Are you certain? You are young, Isabella. You could leave, find someone who has not wasted millennia as a monster. I'm certain. Stop trying to talk me out of staying with you." He laughed, and it was a sound of pure joy. "Very well. Though I warn you, I will likely become insufferably ordinary. I will grow old and cranky, develop pains and ailments, become boring. I look forward to every moment of it." The years proved him both right and wrong. He did grow older, his dark hair fading to silver, his face acquiring the lines and weathering of age. But he never became ordinary. He remained brilliant, curious, passionate about the library and its preservation. Together, he and Isabella expanded the collection, added new wings to house additional volumes, and established a foundation to ensure the library would survive beyond both of their lifetimes. They married in the 5th year of his mortality, a quiet ceremony in the castle's courtyard, with only Madame Vasile and a handful of villagers as witnesses. Victor was 45 by then, or so he appeared, the age he had been when turned, plus the decade he had aged since becoming human again. Isabella was 28. The difference between them was nothing compared to the gulf that had once existed. They had their arguments, as all couples do. Victor could be stubborn, Isabella impatient. But they had something that transcended their difficulties: a shared purpose, a mutual respect, and a love that had been tested in ways few relationships ever are. They had chosen each other fully aware of the costs and consequences, and neither regretted the choice. In the 15th year of his mortality, when Victor was 55 and beginning to move with the careful deliberation of true age, they found another manuscript. This one was hidden deep in the library's oldest section, written in a dialect so archaic that even Victor struggled to translate it. But what it described made them both stop breathing for a moment. "The gift," the text read, "can be passed willingly from one to another. The vampire who has achieved mortality may choose to extend that mortality to a companion, sharing the years gained through their transformation. The ritual requires blood from both parties, mixed and consumed together under a full moon. In this way, love conquers death twice, once by making the immortal mortal, and once by ensuring neither party must endure the grief of losing the other to time." Isabella looked at Victor, whose face was thoughtful. "Is this real? I don't know, like the cure, it could be myth. But then, the cure was supposed to be myth too. And here I stand, aging and grateful for it. If it works, we would have the same lifespan. We would age together, die together. No one left behind, no one forced to mourn alone." They performed the ritual on the next full moon, mixing their blood in a silver chalice and drinking together. Whether it worked or not, they would not know for certain until years had passed. But as time went on, it seemed that perhaps the magic had taken hold. Isabella began to age slightly slower than she should have, while Victor's aging remained steady. By the time another decade had passed, they appeared to be the same age, both in their 60s, both still vibrant and engaged with life. The library continued to grow under their care, becoming famous among scholars and rare book collectors. They opened it to researchers, though only to those who demonstrated proper respect for the materials and understanding of their value. They trained assistants, carefully selected individuals who showed the same dedication to preservation that had drawn Isabella to the position in the first place. In their 70th year, or Victor's 2070th year, depending on how one counted, they sat together in the courtyard where they had once discussed his planned destruction. The fountain had been repaired years ago and now splashed merrily in the evening light. Their hair was white now, their faces deeply lined, their hands spotted with age. But their eyes remained clear and focused. "Do you ever regret it?" Isabella asked. "Giving up immortality? You could have existed forever, seen everything." "I saw enough," Victor said firmly. "More than enough. And none of it was worth as much as these years with you." "I have been many things in my long existence, Isabella. A monster, a scholar, a collector of knowledge. But only with you did I learn to be simply a man. That is the greatest gift anyone has ever given me." "We gave it to each other," Isabella corrected. "You taught me courage, showed me wonder, gave me purpose. Without you, I would have lived a safe, small life. You made my life extraordinary. We made it extraordinary together. That is what matters." They sat in comfortable silence as the sun set, painting the mountains in shades of gold and crimson. Somewhere in the library, their assistants were carefully cataloging new acquisitions. Somewhere in the village below, people who would never know the truth about the castle's master went about their evening routines. The world turned, indifferent and beautiful, and in that moment, Victor and Isabella were simply two elderly people watching the sunset together, content in the knowledge that they had found something rarer than immortality. They had found a love that transcended death itself, that had transformed a monster into a man and a young librarian into the guardian of humanity's greatest treasures. They had found each other. And that, ultimately, was the only magic that mattered.